So this video resumes at the top of page 66 in A Doll's House, midway through the final confrontation between Torvald and Nora. Now, we've said that through most of the preceding half of this section about the way that Helmer dominates this discussion. Now, Nora is turning the tables. She has asked him to sit down. She doesn't want dramatics. She wants business, as it were. She wants this to be a serious conversation. And he replies, "Nora, what is this? This cold, set face? Sit down." See now, she is the one with the imperative. She is the one taking control. It will take some time. I have a lot to talk over with you. And what's interesting here is that Helmer does it. There is something close that alarms him into doing as he is asked. So he sits down at the opposite side of the table. "You alarm me, Nora, and I don't understand you." "No, that is just it. You don't understand me, and I have never understood you either before tonight." That's the key thing. Finally, she has come to understand him more even than she did previously. She realizes now what a weak and a shallow and an ineffectual man he is. So he goes on, "No, you mustn't interrupt me. You must simply listen to what I say. Torvald, this is a settling of accounts." And what a striking metaphor that is, because one, he is a banker, he is meant to be the man of business, and two, this is Ibsen showing us Nora, the woman who is grown up enough, is mature enough, is intelligent enough to exist in this world and to think in those terms. He says, "What do you mean by that?" And after a short silence, she replies, "Isn't there one thing that strikes you as strange in our sitting here like this?" "What is that?" "We have been married now 8 years. Doesn't it occur to you that this is the first time we two, you and I, husband and wife, have had a serious conversation?" "What do you mean by serious?" Now, I think the implication being that there's been no equality, and that simply he has been the one who has taken decisions, and if she is wished to do something as she did with the loan, she had to do so surreptitiously behind his back. We continue on then. "In all these 8 years, longer than that, from the very beginning of our acquaintance, we have never exchanged a word on any serious subject. Was it likely that I would be continually and forever telling you about worries that you could not help me to bear?" Still underestimating. She could not help him to bear. Weak. Foolish. And he says, "I am not speaking about business matters. I say that we have never sat down in earnest together to try and get at the bottom of anything." "But, dearest Nora, would it have been any good to you?" "That's just it. You have never understood me. I have been greatly wronged, Torvald, first by father and then by you." And there's a wider sense here. She's not simply talking about the injustices of her own life, but she's talking about the status of all women, if you like, if we're taking this feminist point of view, which obviously Ibsen is leading us towards here. That those two have dominated her life. He can't believe it. "What? By us two? By us two who have loved you better than anyone else in the world?" As if that were enough. And Nora shakes her head. "You have never loved me. You have only thought it pleasant to be in love with me." "Nora, what do I hear you saying?" Now, when she says pleasant to be in love with me, I don't necessarily think that it's the romance that she is implying appeals to him, although perhaps it is. Perhaps the lust of it, of course, is part of it. Perhaps that's something else that he's enjoyed. But she realizes now from what he said earlier in the scene a few pages ago, she realises that in no sense does he love her more than he loves himself. He replies, "Nora, what do I hear you saying?" And she persists, "It is perfectly true, Torvald. When I was at home with father, he told me his opinions about everything, and so I had the same opinions, and if I differed from him, I concealed the fact, because he would not have liked it. He called me his doll child, and he played with me just as I used to play with my dolls. And when I came to live with you..." And so, in a sense then now, this is the real heart of the play, because it emphasises the metaphor that the title, of course, pointed to right from the beginning, of the status of women as dolls, as playthings of other people, of course, being men. There we have it. Her father played with her, as it were, as in treated her in this regard. Torvald has done too, because she continues on and says, "And when I came to live with you," and he replies, "What sort of expression is that to use about our..." But she simply ignores him. See how completely the utterance lengths have reversed. A few moments ago, she was the one silent, he was the one with the long, blustering monologues. We said then that we did not interpret Nora's relative silence as weakness, and I think that's the converse applies here. Now that she's speaking, she speaks with power and authority, and suddenly Torvald, in his lack of utterance, is the one who is left looking weak. But undisturbed, because of course now anything that Helma says is going to be irrelevant to her. She knows him for what he is, and her mind is made up. She says, "I mean that I was simply transferred from father's hands into yours. You arranged everything according to your own taste, and so I got the same taste as you, or else I pretended to. I am really not quite sure which. I think sometimes the one and sometimes the other." And look at that, transferred, like goods, like possessions, like indeed money. Emphasises again the status of women. She goes on and says, "When I look back on it, it seems to me as if I had been living here like a poor woman, just from hand to mouth." So, in a way then, we started this play by thinking that there was a gulf between Nora and Mrs. Lind and the classes there. But I think what Nora is coming to realise, that simply because she had more money, it doesn't necessarily mean that she was any more free than someone like Mrs. Lind. I think that's the implication there. As a wife, she was just as much the victim of a patriarchal society. It continues, "I have existed merely to perform tricks for you, Torvald. But you wanted it like that. You and father have committed a great sin against me. It is your fault that I have made nothing of my life." And I suppose performing tricks, in a sense, was what she was doing at the beginning of this play, playing games in order to extort money from her husband. That's the life that they had reduced her to. And I think this is very powerful, because we've said that there are times in this play when Nora's behaviour is indeed deeply infantile or childlike, but this excuses all that away. It implies then that if she has behaved in a childlike way, it's only been because she has been treated like one. In other words, very much the responsibility of the men in her life. When she says about having made nothing of her life, I think the implication there is that she could have, for example, had an education or a career and has been denied those things. She simply has one identity, which is as wife and mother. Two identities, but very much conjoined. Look at his reply. "How unreasonable and how ungrateful you are, Nora. Haven't you been happy here?" Ungrateful? What on earth is he talking about? "No," she says, "I have never been happy. I thought I was, but it has never been really so." So, here we have it. At the start of the play, simply living a lie, playing the part that she was expected to play. That's the real reason for what we thought of at the start as such strangely childlike, strangely manipulative behaviour, doing what she was forced to do. Helma can't believe it and says, not happy? And she says, no, only merry. And you have always been so kind to me. But our home has been nothing but a playroom. I have been your doll wife, just as at home I was father's doll child, and here the children have been my dolls. I thought it great fun when you played with me, just as they thought it great fun when I played with them. That is what our marriage has been, Torvald. Interesting, because it once again makes the equivalence of she as being like a wife or a child, which he made a couple of pages ago. But again, crucial passages these, because again they emphasise her discontent with this existence, and the title tells us the significance of it, because it's to that motif that it is now returning her house as a dollhouse. He goes on and says, there is some truth in what you say, exaggerated and strained as your view of it is, but in future it will be different. Playtime is over, and lesson time will begin. Now, he's obviously trying to help on some level, but I can't help thinking that when she is being so rational and sensible, describing her view as being exaggerated and strained, is probably not the best way to win back her affections. But when he says playtime is over and lesson time will begin, he's really not helping then either. Nora says on the next line, whose lessons? Mine or the children's? And of course, in a sense, that then is the dilemma. He still thinks of her as a child, to be taught, to be instructed by him. He really walks into this because he says, both yours and the children's, my darling Nora. She replies, I'm afraid, Torvald, you are not the man to educate me into being a proper wife for you. And he replies, and you can say that, as if she were too stupid to know the difference. She knows now that he's not the man to educate her, because she knows what he's truly like. She's seen it in this scene revealed to her, and even in this section before, after the party, she knows now that he is not the man for her, if indeed any man, perhaps, is to be. Nora continues, and how am I fitted to bring up the children? Nora, didn't you say so yourself a little while ago, that you dare not trust me to bring them up? See how she uses his words against him. And he replies in defence, as if this defends it, in a moment of anger. Why do you take any notice of that? But as we said, actually it was that anger that showed us his true nature. That's not a defence so much as a confirmation. She says, actually, you were perfectly right. I am not fit for the task. There is another task I must undertake first. I must try and educate myself. You are not the man to help me in that. I must do that for myself, and that is why I am going to leave you now. So this is interesting, the idea that she feels like to be a woman in the world, she must be educated, she must have knowledge, she simply cannot continue to try to survive with the ignorance that society and its lack of education and lack of opportunities has given her. I'm going to leave you now. She is leaving him. He springs up in shock to cry out, what are you saying? She says, I must stand quite alone if I am to understand myself and everything about me. It is for that reason that I cannot remain with you any longer. In other words, she wants to be independent. Again, look at the calm, measured duration of her utterances. Although they're shortening, perhaps she's growing more impatient, perhaps simply she's running out of ways to try to communicate with him. He cries out, "Nora, Nora," and she says, "I am going away from here and now, at once. I am sure Christine will take me in for the night." "You are out of your mind. I won't allow it. I forbid you." As if he still has any right to tell her anything. She says, "It is no use forbidding me anything any longer. I will take with me only what belongs to me. I will take nothing from you, either now or later." What sort of madness is this? Tomorrow I shall go home. I mean, to my old home. It will be easiest for me to find something to do there. Emphasis that she doesn't want anything from him financially or in terms of resources. Again, emphasis that she wishes to be independent. And Torvald, having just tried to come across as a bit nicer and more understanding, we now see him again returning to form when he is rather insulting in calling her a blind, foolish woman. And she says, "I must try and get some sense, Torvald." He replies, "To desert your home, your husband and your children, and you don't consider what people will say?" "I cannot consider that at all. I only know that it is necessary for me." He says, "It's shocking. This is how you would neglect your most sacred duties?" "What do you consider my most sacred duties? Do I need to tell you that? Are they not your duties to your husband and your children?" Now this is the view of the 19th century. This is the view of society, not simply of Torvald, but of all of society, of women and their role. This idea that her role as wife and mother is the only thing that can matter. And yet, for Nora, again, the rather proto-feminist character, when she says that she has other duties just as sacred, she's talking about her duties to herself. Now, I don't really need to tell you how shocking this scene would have been for many in the audience at that time. And yet, we're only 20 years before things like women's suffrage. There were moves about to reevaluate elements of the place of women. Even things as simple, for example, as within a decade of this, things as simple as there being movements trying to encourage women to wear less restrictive clothing, so throwing away their corsets and big hooped petticoats and things, in order to make them less imprisoned by their costume. And so there were moves about to change this. There would have been parts of Ibsen's audience who would have been supportive of this, but I think it's fair to say that the majority would have found all this very shocking. Helmer denies any possibility of individuality because he says that there are no other duties. He says, "Indeed you have not. What duties could those be?" As if herself and her own dependence is irrelevant. But she answers him, "Duties to myself. Before all else," he says, "you are a wife and a mother." I don't believe that any longer. I believe that before all else, I am a reasonable human being, just as you are, or at all events that I must try and become one. I know quite well, Torvald, that most people would think you right, and that views of that kind are to be found in books, but I can no longer content myself with what most people say, or with what is found in books. I must think over things for myself and get to understand them." "Can you not understand your place in your own home? Have you not a reliable guide in such matters as that? Have you no religion?" "I'm afraid, Torvald, I do not exactly know what religion is. Because, of course, if we think about it, the religion of the kind preached at this time by an exclusively male priesthood is very much going to be a patriarchal religion, and it's going to very much emphasize the significance of the nuclear family and the woman's restricted place in it. So, religion clearly not going to be very helpful for Nora in her quest for self-discovery. Helmer is horrified because he says, "What are you saying?" "I know nothing but what the clergyman said when I went to be confirmed, to be received into the church. He told us that religion was this and that and the other. When I am away from all this and am alone, I will look into that matter too. I will see if what the clergyman said is true, or at all events, if it is true for me." See then, which he's moved from talking about matters of the world to religion to ethics and to morality. We really are seeing Nora now at her finest as an intelligent and a mature woman. Look at Helmer's response though. If she is at her finest, let's not speculate about how he appears. This is unheard of in a girl of your age. To describe her as a girl, somebody who's been married to him for 8 years, given him several children, the idea that he can still infantilize her in that way is extraordinary. He goes on then, "But if religion cannot lead you aright, let me try and awaken your conscience. I suppose you have some moral sense, or, answer me, am I to think you have none?" Still lecturing her, still patronizing her, not realizing that with everything now that he says, he only drives her further away from him. She says, "I assure you, Torvald, that is not an easy question to answer. I really don't know. The thing perplexes me altogether. I only know that you and I look at it in quite a different light. I am learning, too, that the law is quite another thing from what I supposed, but I find it impossible to convince myself that the law is right. According to it, a woman has no right to spare her old dying father, or to save her husband's life. I can't believe that." And so this brings us back to what we talked about long ago, the idea that Nora may have done things which in the eyes of the law were wrong, but in terms of morality it seems as if she has acted for the best. And yet now Torvald is implying that morality is something that would only condemn Nora. You can see why she might be confused, you can see why she might want to leave and to be able to take stock. He continues, "You talk like a child. You don't understand the conditions of the world in which you live." "No, I don't. But now I'm going to try. I'm going to see if I can make out who is right, the world or I." Now, if you like, that was the dilemma for an intellectual woman at that time, trying to understand that place. Of course, again, he infantilizes her again. There may be some justice when he says that she doesn't understand the conditions of the world in which she lives. That's true. Society obviously would condemn her for this, and yet simultaneously he is blind if he can't see the first inklings of the movement towards women having greater say. Now, there had to be something there. At the end of the day, if there wasn't that thought, then there would have been no play for Ibsen to write. He had to have written this play in the expectation that while many people might find it shocking, at least some would have been sympathetic. So there had to be that trend in mind, but Helmer is ignorant of it. So he has questioned her religion, he's questioned her morality, now he questions her health, her sanity, and says, "You are ill, Nora. You are delirious. I almost think you are out of your mind." And she replies, "I have never felt my mind so clear and certain as tonight." And I think we can second that. We can see that if we think about the way in which she has spoken and acted with the clarity, with the maturity, with the increased knowledge or wisdom that we have witnessed. He goes on and says, "And is it with a clear and certain mind that you forsake your husband and your children?" Still thinking about himself, partly from a practical point of view, But of course, they have servants that, he's not going to starve or live in filth, but it's the shame of it. That's what he doesn't want to bear. So, he asks whether it's with a clear and certain mind, and she replies, yes, it is. And he says, then there is only one possible explanation. What is that? You do not love me any more. She says, no, that is just it. And of course that is it. She can't now love a man that can treat her like that and can seek to restrict her in this way. So, he regains his composure, presumably having been horrified at seeing her say that. And he says, is that a clear and certain conviction too? Nora replies, yes, absolutely clear and certain. That is the reason why I will not stay here any longer. She doesn't love him, and she must leave. Now, I think what we will do here is we will pause at the very top of page 70 in my copy, and then the final 4 pages of this text will pick up in one final video.